How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
Is that the right word? Penultimate?
Sure.
Yeah, that works.
That's right. That's the next to last, right?
I was gonna say this isn't last though, right? I don't know. So I was like, I don't know. We still got like Hollow Man, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Penultimate
that's right.
is second last.
See.
Second to last. Yeah, I was right. I know big fancy words.
Penultimate. That's this. This is I'm just using a normal Bic pen.
Wow. People have been canceled for less.
I'm so stupid.
Gary turns 40 and all of a sudden he's making dad jokes.
I'm in.
Wait a minute. All of a sudden?
Well, he's turned into Gary Senior here.
Okay, that's fair.
It's
That's
slowly just morphing into my father. Oh well. Welcome to hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the podcast that explores the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. I'm one of your hosts, Justin Bishop.
I'm co-host Gary Horne. Joining us today is joining us today is the voice you hear cackling in the background is Mr. Todd Davis. Welcome back to the show, Todd.
Hey,
guys,
guys.
as a special guest.
Thanks
Gary,
for having me.
Gary, happy birthday!
Why are you talking to
Yay!
yourself?
Oh yeah. Well, I'm actually. Oh, do you think we fooled anyone with that?
I don't think so. No, actually, that joke, by the way, I listened back. If you go back in the Psychotronic archives, that was the initial joke at the beginning of our Starship Troopers episode on there. So I was keeping it consistent. For some
what
reason,
joke?
I started that episode saying I'm Justin Bishop.
Oh, did you?
Oh, nice.
And then I said,
Wow.
I don't like movies that aren't smart.
I do like movies that aren't smart.
I think you said that too.
That's true.
Anyway, all right.
Oh.
You were also recovering from a sickness. You said you were full of mucus. So are you feeling better now?
A year and a half later, yeah, I'm good.
I'm full of baloney.
2 years later, that's
I was
probably
about to
2
say, I
years.
think it was like February 2018 was that episode.
Okay, so
Oh.
2.5 years ago. Yeah, I've recovered.
Okay.
Thank you for your concern,
But what if that was like the original COVID case?
man. Could have been. Sorry about it. Sorry, my bad. Anyway, guys, this is week. What week is this? Week 6 of our Paul Verhoeven series, the Sex and Violence, the films of Paul Verhoeven. As we were discussing in the intro to the show, this is the penultimate episode of this series. We're going to end things next week, but we got a big one this week. I'd say one
every week.
Yeah, there it is.
Oh God!
if you really did, you don't have to say it.
You're right.
So anyway, I don't know how to recover from that and go on to the next.
You guys see
subject. I don't know how to segue.
You see everybody's butts in this movie?
I've seen them. Yeah, lots of butts.
There's a lot of butts. I mean, there's a lot of butts in Paul Verhoeven's movies in general. I mean, I think they all have butts in them, right? Does Total Recall have butts? There's 3 boobs. Can't remember to see Arnold's butt in that one.
I was about to say, generally in Arnold movies, you see his butt at some point.
Yeah. It's because it's so well sculpted. He wants to show
I
off.
would
That's
show
true.
it as well. It's so smooth and sculpted.
It is hairless, like a baby.
Yeah. Arnold's baby. New band name. I called it Arnold's baby butt.
So anyway, after the critical and commercial beating that Showgirls received, it probably comes as no surprise that for his next project, Paul Verhoeven returned to the tried and true world of science fiction, the genre, of course, that had given him 2 of his biggest hits, RoboCop and Total Recall. And, you know, the film that he followed Showgirls up with, it would, upon release, become, I guess, to no one's surprise at this point, kind of controversial and was very misunderstood at the time of its release. But nearly a quarter of a century later, it has become one of the most popular and I would say one of the most beloved films of Verhoeven's career. And we are talking, of course, about Starship Troopers.
In every age, there is a cause worth fighting for. But in the future, the greatest threat to our survival will not be man at all.
Hey, kid, what's going on? It's war! We're going to war!
Now, the youth of tomorrow must travel across the stars to defend our world.
We are a generation commanded by fate to defend humankind.
Everyone fights, no one quits.
We are going in with first wave! You smash the entire area! You kill anything that has more than 2 legs! You get me? We get you, sir!
But they will face an enemy more devastating than any ever imagined.
Here they come! Bob! Incoming!
The bugs laid a trap for us, didn't they?
Prepare for battle and journey to the front lines of the next frontier.
Kill them all!
Starship Troopers.
I thought we were watching Super Troopers, so my notes are gonna be funny, meow.
You thought Farva was a Verhoeven creation.
I did, yeah.
Wow.
He just felt he felt like he'd fit right in and like on Mars. And
this movie's not even set on Mars.
well, I know. I'm just saying he could have. You know.
All right, meow. Let's move on.
All right.
So, Starship Troopers, based on a novel of the same name by a legendary science fiction author named Robert Heinlein. So Heinlein's novel, when it came out, it was also very controversial when it was released. This was in 1959. So Heinlein, he had served in the military. He was in the Navy back in the 1930s, and his military service greatly influenced his writings and his political leanings. His writings were often kind of at odds with some of his other sci-fi contemporaries, guys like Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, whose stuff tended to be, there's a lot of like anti-communism themes, things like that, and a lot of that old sci-fi. Not that Heinlein stuff is necessarily pro-communism, but it definitely leaned in a very different direction than a lot of the other sci-fi writers of the time.
And those three guys, by the way, are considered like the big three of sci-fi.
Asimov, Clarke, and Heinlein, yes.
Yeah,
mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So sometime around 1958 or so, he began work on Starship Troopers, at least partially inspired by his anger at President Eisenhower's decision to suspend nuclear tests. So Eisenhower decided to suspend nuclear testing. At the same time, the Soviets were kind of increasing their own testing, and he was pissed off about this. So he and his wife, Virginia, they created the Patrick Henry League. It was inspired, the name of that was inspired by Heinlein's essay, Who Are the Heirs of Patrick Henry, which was written to defend continued above-ground nuclear testing by the U.S. The article begins with a pretty famous quote by Patrick Henry that says, "Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." We all know the quote, right? You guys know who Patrick Henry is, or at least somewhat. He's founding father, signed the Declaration of Independence, all that. Anyway, so he's looking at this quote, and this is, man, I read that quote, and I'm like, there's definitely some people right now who have that shit tattooed on their back.
Oh yeah, yeah,
and aren't wearing a mask.
Yeah.
So, but Robert Heinlein, he was very strong in his political views, and within a matter of weeks, this idea comes to his head. Within a matter of weeks, he had written Starship Troopers in full as kind of a way to clarify his military and political views. He was not hiding like what he was trying to say with this book. It was a metaphor, but he wasn't being secretive about it. The dedication in the book reads, "To drill sergeants everywhere who have labored to make men out of boys." So that's the first thing you read when you open the book.
Wow.
Yeah. But the book was very popular when it came out. It won the Hugo Award for Best Novel, but it has been accused, even not long after release, was accused of being highly militaristic, pro-war, and pro-fascist. So screenwriter Ed Neumeier, who we know from our ROBOCOP series, he was the guy who co-wrote that and was the guy who brought a lot of the satirical elements to that script. He had been a fan of Heinlein's novel since childhood. Verhoeven, on the other hand, had never read it. So when the book was brought to him by Ed Neumeier, Ed Neumeier had always wanted to adapt this book, and he had been working on another story that was sort of similar, then just decided, hey, why don't we check and see who owns the rights to Starship Troopers? Turns out nobody owned the rights to Starship Troopers to make a movie out of it. So they bought it. Him and John Davidson, the producer, bought it and brought it to Paul Verhoeven. Paul Verhoeven starts to read the book, and he found that the book made him, quote, bored and depressed.
Wow.
I stopped after 2 chapters because it was so boring. It's really quite a bad book. I asked Ed Neumeier to tell me the story because I couldn't read the thing. It's a very right-wing book.
So we know Ed Neumeier, as evidenced in his work on ROBOCOP, is a decidedly not right-wing kind of guy. So he went about adapting Starship Troopers, and when he did so, he decided to kind of subvert the themes of the book. Instead kind of writing the film as a satire that pokes fun at militarism and fascism. So he's taking all of the themes of the book, and he's not like taking them out. He's sort of amplifying them to the point of ridiculousness.
He hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
He quotes at some point was saying that he was around a bunch of his friends and stuff that thought that ROBOCOP was fascist. And so he was like, so for this one, we were just like, fuck it, let's go all in. Let's be real fascist.
Yeah, I mean, and ROBOCOP was also a satire of some of the same elements, just not quite to the extreme of this movie.
Yeah, and to be fair to the book, I've read it a few places, like as it's reviewed now, a lot of people think that Heinlein was being way more nuanced than he got credit for at the time, that the character of Rico, or whatever, I think that's the name stayed the same in the book, is a little bit more, there's more, they say it's not too in depth because the book's actually intended as just like, it's one of his last of his juvenile series, I think is what they called it. It was just like meant for younger readers. And so it doesn't get like too complex, but also there are a lot of people say now that he also was trying to do his own form of maybe not satire, but he wasn't just strictly praising the military so much as just describing what this society would be like if, and the potentials ups and downs of it or something. I've been reading a few reviews of it.
Yeah, and I'll preface this with saying I have not read the book. I've only read summaries of it. But I do think that knowing what his personal political views were and his reason for writing the book, I think it's pretty safe to say that he was, to an extent, promoting sort of totalitarianism to a point.
They say he was at least very pro-military because he had been there, and but one of the reasons he's considered one of the greats, they say like his prose, I guess, is a lot like I saw several comparisons to like Hemingway, and it was like from the style that they write, like, and they're both, I think, ex-military, and so they have like certain thought processes that are saying maybe going in different directions. But he definitely was a guy, from everything I read, that was like military whips you into shape and gets you to be a better person, and all of that stuff.
So the shoot for Starship Troopers was pretty uneventful, which it seems to be kind of a theme with these Verhoeven movies we've talked about so far. We're not talking about any issues on these movies like we have on some other films in the past where, like, the set burns down or, the stuntman dies, but aside from some kind of squabbles with actors and crew, there haven't been any major issues on really any of the shoots on Verhoeven's films. It's not until afterwards, when it comes time to try to get them past the ratings board, that the real drama seems to start on all these movies.
Yeah, the biggest thing I could see on this one was, where they were filming a lot of the time, was it Arizona, I think?
Wyoming.
That in that desert area, it was like super, super hot. And they were struggling with the budget. Because in the book, one of the big parts of it is like these soldiers wear these like armored suits, like almost like Master Chief from like Halo style.
Oh, they're even bigger. They're almost like
mech suits.
Yeah, they're kind of like mech suits, but
there are mech suits in it, which is apparently like what where like Alien and stuff like, or Aliens gets the idea from, or like that's been a trope that passed down.
Yeah, they took those out not only for budgetary reasons though, but because they kind of thought they would look a little silly on screen, because these suits allow the soldiers to kind of like jump like great distances. So they're like, it's going to look kind of goofy if you've just got like a big battle scene and dudes are bouncing around in the background like grasshoppers, like it might work in a novel, but on screen it might look a little silly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the soldiers, even in the scenes you see them in the desert area, aren't covered up all the way like everywhere, because it was like they said it would get to like, with the suit and stuff, everything on their temperatures would get to like 124 degrees or something insane.
Jeez.
Like Jake Busey got heat stroke at one point.
I believe it, man.
Production got held up.
That's freaking, I can't imagine. I mean, it's probably in the 90s here today. I had to walk outside for less than 10 minutes to take my dogs out earlier and came back drenched in sweat. And I was like, this is miserable. I'm staying in the air conditioning for the rest of the day. I can't imagine 124 degrees. So of the film's $100 million budget, about 40 million of that would be devoted solely to the film's special effects, which in a first for Verhoeven would actually be a mixture of practical and CGI, because he hasn't used really any CGI in his career at this point. The man overseeing those effects was Phil Tippett. We've talked about Phil Tippett on the show before, of course. He had provided the iconic Ed 209 for ROBOCOP. He also, not long before, a couple years before this, was the dinosaur supervisor on Jurassic Park.
Nice.
Was actually going to do the dinosaurs stop motion before they decided to go CG with them. But he's a legend. I mean, he is an absolute legend in the effects field. Still is. 200 of the film's 600 FX shots would contain computer-generated bugs. Now compare that to Jurassic Park, which had less than 15 CGI dinosaur shots.
Wow.
This is a massive undertaking. At the time, Starship Troopers was one of the widest uses of computer-generated imagery in a film so far, if not the widest, period. This was like an enormous effects production.
Yeah, I mean, when you've got, it's, you can't just have one or two running around. They send huge battalions of
thousands
of soldiers.
Yeah,
not to mention, so I mean, and your enemy has to be greater than you. So, yeah.
One of the first times I remember hearing about that like thing from Lord of the Rings. Well, it was from Lord of the Rings, where like the armies are like really like 20 guys are running or something, and they just like copy them over and over, or like CGI some people in there. But that's done here. Yeah. Like,
but on Lord of the Rings, a few years later, Weta created this technology where essentially it created like an AI where it would generate these soldiers, and you could program, they have certain limitations and things like that, but it's essentially creating artificial intelligence in its animation. So you don't have to animate, or they didn't have to like animate every single soldier, every single orc or whatever. That doesn't exist on this movie. Every single bug you see on screen, somebody's having to animate.
That's a pain in the ass.
So one of the first decisions that Verhoeven made was that the bugs would be biologically realistic rather than the anthropomorphic bugs of the novel. See, in Heinlein's novel, the bugs, they stood upright. They were like humanoid bugs. They stood upright. They wore uniforms. They fired weapons. But Verhoeven didn't like the idea of having like a cockroach holding a ray gun in a uniform. He wanted these to look like creatures, like monsters.
This was before Men in Black.
Yeah. So I don't think this is before Men in Black, is it?
I don't know.
97?
Wait a minute. It is Men in Black.
Yeah.
Pretty damn close.
Yeah.
If it's Men in Black was 97 also. So the same year, somebody made the decision that a cockroach could hold a ray gun.
It's a little bit different type of movie anyway.
It's interesting to see Hollywood had this like head-to-head battle though. Like real important political decisions.
So Verhoeven asked effects designer Craig Hayes to make bugs that were convincing as actual insects, but also he wanted them to look scary and threatening, and he wanted them to have bodies that doubled as weapons. So by the way, a little side note, we have actually discussed Craig Hayes before. I was like, who is this guy? I started looking into him. He was actually the same guy who designed the full scale model of Ed 209 for Phil Tippett on RoboCop. He worked for Phil Tippett. So he designed the full scale model that you see when it's not being animated, you know?
Yeah.
We talked about, although in our RoboCop episode, we talked about him and him doing that, but we referred to him as Craig Davies because that's actually the name that he's credited as in RoboCop. But for later movies, he's credited as Craig Hayes. I don't know why he would be under a different name. I'm sure there's a story there, but anyway, it's the same guy. Fortunately for Phil Tippett and everyone involved in the effects, he no longer had to use traditional stop motion animation to animate little models of the bugs. Instead, he used something called a digital input device. This is super interesting. I had never heard of this before. I'm not sure if it's been used in other movies or not, but it's a really interesting way of doing this. So with this device, he would actually still use stop motion. He would have his stop motion animators move the limbs on scale models of the insects, just like you would if you're doing like a traditional stop motion animation. But the movements were recorded by a computer, which converted them directly into the digital environment. So the result is the on-screen digital bugs are able to move with a more realistic weight and mass than had been possible with a lot of CGI prior to this.
Well, that's cool because I mean, if you're also can replicate that, you get consistency across the board.
Yeah, I think I think the special effects in this for a movie that's almost 25 years old is
not bad.
I think it holds up pretty well. I mean, there are moments here and there where the age of the effects show, but I think generally the effects of the bugs, I think, still look pretty damn good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It did kind of make me wish I had seen this in the theaters because I think this would have been, just a fun popcorn.
It played the scale of this would play very well on the big screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way they mix things is incredible. And I remember seeing this in a theater. And I also remember this. The one thing I always remember with this movie is that being one of those movies, this and that movie, the Poughkeepsie tapes, I see trailers for them, and then it's still like 2 years later, the movie had not come out or something. I swear.
Well, the Poughkeepsie tapes were much longer than that because I think whoever bought it went bankrupt or something. That thing sat on the shelf for like 8 years or something crazy. Ooh, but yes, yeah. I understand what you're saying. Like Free Guy. I've been seeing Free Guy just came out in theaters, the Ryan Reynolds movie. I've been seeing trailers for that for 2 years, since 2019, which is kind of the case with every movie right now. I think I'll I don't know how long I've been seeing trailers for the new James Bond movie.
Oh God, yeah.
That's true. And I mean, it stuck out because obviously, like whatever age I was then, I was like, man, this could be fun. It was like fucking monster bugs and stuff. That's why I was into it, not because I was into Nazis.
Oh, good. So since the bugs were not added in production, it did present a problem for the actors on set, which was how to have a life and death struggle when there's literally nothing on set for you to fight. So to help with this, they had flags on poles that were kind of used to be sure that the actors' eye lines were correct. And then Verhoeven himself, there's footage of this if you watch any of the behind the scenes stuff. Verhoeven himself would be off camera, like jumping around and screaming like he's the bug, so the actors would have something to react to. And this is not like, I guess this is kind of common now to have movies made this way, but in 1997, that wasn't really the case. In 1997, having a fully CGI character or creature on screen where the actors didn't have anything to react to, that's a new thing that the actors have to learn. This is not a normal thing back then.
It's wild. It kind of, takes you back to that stage acting where you're acting to something off, either off in the wings or something that's appearing above the audience where you're having to, it's just you and the lights.
Yeah.
But that's kind of cool to see that with as highly advanced as the special effects were, the acting technique actually kind of reverts back to an older style of acting.
Yeah.
Which is pretty neat to see the mesh of the two come out with this product.
And any way that you could get like actors having to run from Phil Tippett chasing you with a broom, which is apparently a thing. So that just sounds like a fun time.
It does. So, the realism that Verhoeven was shooting for with the bugs also translated to his design ideas for the spaceships as well. So for help with this, he enlisted Scott Anderson from Sony Imageworks. So Scott Anderson had just won an Oscar for his work on Babe.
I don't remember any spaceships in Babe.
You haven't seen the director's cut, clearly.
Oh, okay. All right.
There was a whole subplot removed from it.
How do you think those animals can talk?
Yeah, come on.
There. So Verhoeven envisioned bulky, boxy spacecraft as opposed to kind of the sleek fighters that you'd see in something like Star Wars. And his reasoning behind that was that there's no air or water resistance in space, so they don't need to be aerodynamic, which kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to dismiss just how massive an undertaking the effects work was on Starship Troopers. Like, we now live in a world where like every big Marvel movie has wall-to-wall effects, and half the movie is CGI, or hell, I mean, most Marvel movies are halfway animated movies. That wasn't the case in 1997. The sheer number of elements that are combined in the battle sequences alone in this film is incredible. And it really does make it a triumph of digital compositing. So for instance, in one scene, they had to use motion control cameras. You guys, we've mentioned motion control cameras on the show before, but I'm not sure we've ever discussed exactly what that is.
Is that kind of where like the camera records a movement so that camera can repeat that exact movement, so they can get different plates of different things happening?
100% what it is.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
The camera records the movement to a computer, and then it's able to exactly reproduce that exact movement.
Nice.
In another setup. Yes.
Cool.
So they did that in this. They used motion control cameras to match the movements of live actors that were filmed in front of a green screen, and then the movements of 2 stop motion animated spaceship miniatures as they crashed, while elsewhere you've got a full scale, fully posable, hydraulically operated bug. They're seamlessly intercut with computer generated bugs animated using that digital input device. All of these elements, that's like, what is it, like 5 different things that are having to be put together in one shot, it's insane. And then for another scene where you've got the airstrike on the bugs, where they're being carpet bombed in a canyon,
yeah,
they had CGI insects that were matched with live action footage of real explosions to create a mile-long chain of fireballs, which was the longest rolling explosion in special effects history.
Wow.
And it's a great shot in the movie.
Cool shot,
because it's coming towards the camera. It's a really great shot. And these are just the scenes where like live action and CGI footage are combined. Even the combining of purely digital elements was impressive. Like, I said before, that Lord of the Rings, that technology didn't exist. That crowd technology didn't exist at the time. So there's a scene where the bugs storm the fortress, and Phil Tippett spent 60 hours layering and animating the insects. There were over 1,000 bugs in a single shot. And not only that, if you watch the behind the scenes documentary on this, Gary, did you watch any of the behind the scenes stuff on the Blu-ray?
Yeah.
So they talk about this shot where the camera's on a crane, and it goes up. The camera goes up, and where they were filming out in the desert, it was very windy. So the camera kind of jiggles a little bit. And there was no way for them to stop that. So you can actually see it in the movie. But that's the scene where all these bugs are coming over the canyon, and they're not only having to animate the bugs, but they're having to compensate for that little bit of jiggle in the camera. It was just made that much more work. And it's one of the first shots that Phil Tippett worked on. And he's like, fuck, I hope the rest of it's not like this. Like, this is going to be rough. Yeah, the effects of Starship Troopers it's a huge undertaking. I mean, it involved half a dozen FX studios, hundreds of CG artists, animators, and compositors. That's not to mention the guys in Phil Tippett's workshop who are creating the animatronics, like the brain bug that we see, or a lot of the close-ups of the bugs. Those are big puppets that they're creating in addition to the CGI stuff. It's really an enormous undertaking.
Yeah, just thinking back to the assault on the fortress after the Rico and his team come in. It's a dope sequence because it's high energy, and they're moving fast through all this stuff while simultaneously trying to fight off this horde of bugs, and it's just it's pretty cool.
You had ILM involved, and it was just interesting, like all these different what did they call it in the commentary? They called it like the inbreeding or something of design or something, or like in special effects and stuff like that. Just like one of the groups that worked on it was called Band from the Ranch, and it was actually people that used to be with Lucas, Skywalker Ranch, but they had gotten in trouble for partying, like breaking into George Lucas's office and partying, so they started their own thing,
and they called it Band from the Ranch. That's great. I love that.
That, I think there's some ties to the Spawn movie based on like the creation of that group. I remember the name Band from the Ranch. They would, they talked on the Spawn commentary from 1997. They talk about partying and some of the folks that are Steve Williams and I forget the director's name, but they were all working at ILM and would regularly party in George's office.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at their filmography now, and they did some good stuff. Yeah. They got started on Congo, which is not great, but they did Men in Black, they did Titanic, they did The Relic, Dante's Peak, Deep Rising, Dr. Dolittle. They've done Twister.
Like the Spawn movie is what it is.
It's bad.
Yeah, I
haven't seen it in a long time.
It's a comic book slice of the 90s.
Yes, it is very much.
But the commentary is actually very entertaining. It's really, really fun.
Well, I liked, it's just interesting. There was all these people working on this thing, and you kind of covered it, but like just how much went into the special effects on this. But yeah, one of the coolest parts to me was even on this is mostly ILM, I think, was when you first go to like Denise Richards' side of things, where it's on the station and she's learning to pilot and all that stuff as she takes the thing out. It's just interesting. They use like so many miniatures and then like just CGI in the right places to like that you can tell if you're looking for it, but otherwise it works really, really well. Like it looks really good even today.
And it's funny, we've talked a lot about the effects on this so far, but we haven't really mentioned the cast yet. And that's probably because the effects are much more impressive than the actors, but that's kind of on purpose. I think it's on purpose. So Verhoeven initially cast actors who had kind of the bland good looks of soap opera actors. And in fact, many of them were soap opera actors. He was also trying the whole opening sequence of this, that propaganda video, is very much modeled on Triumph of the Will, the Nazi propaganda film by Leni Riefenstahl. And he's very much trying to cast people who look like the people from that movie, which are sort of the Nazis' ideal Aryan soldiers. Yeah. So he's casting people that kind of had that same look on purpose. So cast as the lead character of Johnny Rico was Casper Van Dien in his first major film role. Van Dien's career up to this point had mostly consisted of TV appearances, including a stint on the soap opera One Life to Live and a 7-episode run on Beverly Hills 90210. Dina Meyer was cast as Dizzy Flores. Meyer, she'd already been in a couple movies at this point. She'd had prominent roles in Johnny Mnemonic and Dragonheart, speaking of slices of the 90s. But like Van Dien, she'd gotten her start on television, which also included a 12-episode run on Beverly Hills 90210.
Oh boy, I'm sensing a pattern here.
Yeah, just a bunch of beautiful people. Yeah. Casper Van Dien, that jawline is unstoppable.
It is. I mean, he was born to play a soldier in a movie, honestly. Denise Richards was cast as Johnny's high school sweetheart, Carmen. Richards, she'd begun her career as a model, but had made her film debut in actually her first film role is in the Lethal Weapon parody Loaded Weapon 1, which we briefly discussed back in our Lethal Weapon episode. But she'd also done, I think, Tammy and the T-Rex at this point, which wasn't exactly a high point in her career, but I would highly recommend watching it if you haven't seen it.
I like that movie. And at this time, Denise Richards to me was like the most perfect woman God had ever put together.
She is quite attractive.
Yeah. And so it makes perfect sense that she would be in this film. It's like she is the ideal human woman at this time.
And like her co-star, she had previously worked in television, mostly in kind of single episode guest appearances on shows like Married with Children. She had an episode of there. Casper Van Dien had also guest starred on that show. And alongside her Starship Troopers co-star Neil Patrick Harris on Doogie Howser, MD.
How about that?
She also did an episode of Beverly Hills 90210.
There you go. That's 3 for 3.
I don't think Neil Patrick Harris was on Beverly Hills 90210. But you guys know, I'm sure everyone knows who Neil Patrick Harris is. He's probably the most famous of the cast, at least prior to this, because this was one of his early film roles, but he had, of course, played the title character on Doogie Howser for 4 years or so in the early 90s, got an Emmy. So, yeah, I think he was probably the most established star in the movie at this point. Then rounding out the cast, we've got Jake Busey.
And his teeth.
Brother of Gary Busey, of course.
He's a brother? No, I thought he was his son.
No, it's his brother.
I always thought Jake Busey was his son.
I think it's his brother.
I think Jake is the son of Gary.
I don't think
I'm
that's
looking
right.
it up. I'm Googling it.
Jake Busey's 50 years old. How could he be? Oh, he is.
Busey is the son of actor Gary Busey.
I'll be damned. You got me.
Mark it down, folks.
How old is Gary Busey?
Gary's old, man. He was old. He was old back in.
You listen to me. Gary Busey started fucking at 12. So Gary Busey.
Gary Busey is in his late 70s. He's older than I thought.
Gary Busey right there.
Yeah, look at that.
Wow. How about that?
Gary Busey is the only man who considers being born the first time he got some pussy.
Oh my God. Anyway, Jake Busey, who had just prior to this, like the year before, I think, was in The Frighteners, right?
Yeah.
96.
That's right.
Then we've also got the legendary Clancy Brown, Seth Gilliam, Patrick Muldoon, who's another soap opera guy.
Who was Melrose Place, but most importantly, besides stealing Denise Richards here, he's also Jeff in Saved by the Bell, the guy who steals Kelly Kapowski from Zach Morris.
He's a real son of a bitch.
He really is.
Oh, man.
And of course, we had Verhoeven regulars Michael Ironside, Marshall Bell, and Dean Norris.
They were all in Total Recall.
All in Total Recall.
Michael Ironside also lost limbs in Total Recall.
He did. That's
Paul
true.
Verhoeven just like
Twice as
chopping
many.
shit off Michael Ironside.
And then, oddly enough, we've also got Golden Girls star Rue McClanahan there as a blind biology teacher, and I don't know how did she get involved in this?
Yeah,
I've never, like, every time I watch this movie, I'm like, did her agent send her this? Was she just a big fan of Total Recall?
Blanche?
Blanche. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's wild to me that she is in this movie.
It is really strange because you don't see her in much around this time, I don't think. And
I don't know if I've seen her in anything except for Golden Girls and this. I mean, I know she's in other stuff, but it's not like you see her popping up as like a character actor in things.
I'd ask her, but sadly, she is gone. And Betty White is the only immortal Golden Girl.
Well, she's a Highlander.
Yeah,
so.
She's a Highlander. Nice. Speaking of Highlander, now that you say that, Clancy Brown is the main villain in Highlander, and Michael Ironside's the main villain in Part 2.
Yep.
Wow. Clancy Brown, honestly, is one of my all-time favorite character actors.
So
I mean,
good.
he is. I mean, most people probably know him best, probably for Highlander and Shawshank, probably.
Yeah.
But he's also, was his name Mr. Krabs on SpongeBob? But the dude is in just. Literally just look up his filmography.
Pull up his I did it because he was obviously, I mean, this jumping the gun a little bit. He was in an episode of Star Trek Enterprise. So I ended up looking up his stuff and was like, holy shit, this is the longest resume ever.
Oh, dude. I mean, Pet Sematary 2, Blue Steel, with Jamie Lee Curtis. Like, even more recently, I think he was in that Mortuary Collection. He's supposed to be in John Wick Chapter 4 that just got announced.
Damn.
So, yeah, he's all. I love that guy.
He's so good, dude. And the thing about him and Ironside again is, and this is for obvious reasons, and I'm sure we're going to dive all into this, but these are two guys that, especially at the time, like Clancy's done some more likable roles recently, I think, but
I'd say he's played more villains though.
Yeah, but he definitely, at least at this time, was always a son of a bitch.
Yeah.
And like he's that's usually Ironside's role a lot of the time too. Like they're just great villain actors. And so, but in this movie, they're cast as heroes, which, was, I'm sure, purposeful, obviously. And
they're heroes within the universe of the film.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Like they're the good guys. And so I remembered this, being for a time that you could like Clancy Brown if you were not thinking about everything else.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, he's good to these people. Like he ends up being like the chubby, like, I was hard on you at once, but you know, now we're on the same side, and you know,
but we definitely
up, kid.
We definitely see him like kill a soldier, I think, at one point, and he throws a knife through Jake Busey's hand. You know, like he's anyway,
to be fair, I think for whatever reason in that world, they just have like they can fix pretty much anything except a head blown off,
except your head getting blown in half.
They still tried though. Medic.
Yeah. So the young cast of this, you know, made up of daytime and primetime soap actors. It actually caused a lot of the crew while they were filming this to refer to the movie as Melrose Space, which is just a detail that I just love. I just love that detail. So what's become one of the film's most talked about scenes, and I don't want to say controversial, but talked about. Cast members appear in a mixed sex shower room, which is something that we discussed it back on that episode, but Verhoeven had actually attempted this a decade earlier.
In fact, I've done that in RoboCop too, but nobody seemed to notice. I don't know what I just turned into like Speedy Gonzalez. Andale! If you look,
take your clothes off.
That was Mickey Mouse. have you ever seen a Speedy Gonzalez cartoon?
Gorge. If you look when he was still a human being, and they go into the police locker room. Anyway, in the middle of the sheet, there is a woman there topless. No one seemed to notice. I thought in RoboCop, nobody noticed. So in Starship Troopers, I will make sure that they do. The idea I wanted to express was that these so-called advanced people are without libido. Here they are talking about war and their careers and not looking at each other at all. It is sublimated because they are fascists.
So of course, not all of the cast members saw this as a sort of political critique of authoritarianism. They just saw a typical attempt at sensationalism from the guy who gave us Basic Instinct and Showgirls. So they said, and I don't know how many cast members were involved in this little rebellion, but at least a couple of them said they would only do the scene nude if Verhoeven directed it in the nude as well.
Well, my cinematographer was born in a nudish colony, and I have no problem with taking my clothes off. So he did. In fact, it's strange, but of course, Americans get more upset about nudity than ultraviolence. I am constantly amazed about that. I mean, I haven't seen any sex scenes in American film that are anything other than completely boring. A bare breast is more difficult to go through the censors than a body riddled with bullets.
So he's not wrong, and I guess we'll talk about the sense or the ratings on this here in a bit. But while we're kind of on the
commentary, by the way, in the commentary, he completely blames it on Dina Meyer. He says,
"Oh, does he?"
Yeah, he completely blames it on Dina Meyer that he says she's very naughty, that she so that she's unassuming, but she's very challenging sometimes.
So while we're on the subject of the cast, though, Todd,
yes,
you already mentioned Clancy Brown's appearance on Star Trek. Did you find surely among this cast that's been all over television, you have found something?
Oh yeah, some of these chuckleheads are definitely on Star Trek. We got Christopher Murray, who plays Rico's dad. He was automobile driver in an episode of Star Trek Voyager.
Automobile driver.
Yeah,
don't you dare say Todd doesn't dig.
Why? I'm curious about an episode of Voyager that would have automobiles.
Yeah.
That is a good point.
I think Tom Paris was kind of obsessed with like mid 20th
was it one of those
century.
holodeck episodes?
Yeah. To unwind, he would go to the holodeck and like drive a race car. So
okay, all right.
So it was season 5, episode 22, 11:59. That was in 1999. Matt Levin, who plays the character of Kitten Smith, which I don't recall from Star Trek Troopers, but he's in the cast list. He played a character
probably
called
a soldier.
Yeah, probably. Raffin in an episode of Star Trek Voyager, season 4, episode 4, Nemesis, which premiered September 24th, 1997, less than 2 months before Starship Troopers. And of course, Dina Meyer was Commander Donatra in Star Trek Enterprise in 2002.
Really?
And then we got Brenda Strong, who plays Captain Deladier, and she was Rochella in Star Trek Next Generation, season 1, episode 16, When the Bow Breaks in 1988. Blake Lindsley played Katrina in Starship Troopers, and she was a character sign-on in Deep Space Nine, season 7, episode 7, Once More Into the Breach, 1998, which was written by Ronald D. Moore of Battlestar Galactica fame. And she was also Kaporak in Star Trek Klingon Academy, which is a video game that came back out in 2000. And of course, Clancy Brown was Zobral in Star Trek Enterprise, season 1, episode 24, Desert Crossing, which came out in 2002 and was covered on episode 21 of the Computer Resume podcast with special guest Queen Momo, which is available now wherever you get your podcast.
Wow, you got the plug in there.
And that's everyone on Star Trek.
And he got a plug in there. How about that?
Yeah.
You know what's funny is listening back to our Psychotronic Film Society episode of this. I was so proud of myself. I brought up a Star Trek reference in that episode for Starship Troopers, but it was about that the plot reminded me of, from the original series, the episode with the Gorn, because it's a similar scenario where the Enterprise is like going to a planet. Well, we were describing the whatever of this movie. It was just like the Enterprise goes to a planet. They're just like hanging out. And then they start getting attacked by the Gorn. And so then they think they've got to fight back. And then there's like confusion. They can't get their translator working or whatever. And while they're working, they decide that they have, what is widely considered one of the greatest fight scenes of all time between Kirk and the Gorn.
Is it?
Greatest. We'll put some air quotes around.
We'll say most iconic.
There you go.
and then until the translators get working or whatever, and then they and unlike in Starship Troopers, when you're not a son of a bitch, you are like, oh, they're just pissed off because we're like all up in their space and we should not be here. And so they work it out. And they're like, hey, we'll fuck off. And that's the way it's supposed to go, I suppose.
That's not how it went here.
Not how it went here. But for some reason, I made that comparison. I had to bring it back up here.
Nice.
Now, interestingly, this is actually one of the few Verhoeven films where he didn't have to really do too much to battle the MPAA over the rating. There were a couple of gore shots and things like that had to be removed to get an R. He did have to go back and forth a couple of times to prevent getting an NC-17, but it wasn't like a battle like he'd had to go through on, well, Showgirls he didn't battle, but Basic Instinct and Total Recall and RoboCop. This one was a little bit easier to go by. There were a few minor tweaks that had to get made to get past the studio execs. But the film that we ended up with is pretty close to Verhoeven's original vision. Part of that is because Sony was kind of going through a lot of transition at the time. They kept like dropping their studio head and getting new ones. And there was just a lot of chaos. And I think they didn't have time to just deal with Verhoeven shit. So like he was able to get away with a little bit more gore than he might have otherwise. Now, one of the guys who helped him with this, of course, is Mark Goldblatt, the editor. Mark Goldblatt, I think we've discussed him on here in the past because he was this guy. He did RoboCop, so I'm sure we discussed him on that. But he was a guy who came from Carolco. He had done like the Terminator with them and Commando and things like that. Legendary kind of editor. But this is a guy who, like, you got to look at his filmography. I mean, he did everything from Piranha with Joe Dante, stuff like Humanoids of the Deep, like working with a lot of Roger Corman stuff. And then he goes up through the ranks to like more studio stuff. It's a lot of like genre stuff, The Howling with Joe Dante, Halloween 2, but right around the time he was doing RoboCop, we didn't discuss this then, but I thought it interesting. He did try to make it as a director himself, Mark Goldblatt. He directed 2 movies right after he did RoboCop as an editor because he had been a second unit director on RoboCop too. And he decided to go on his own. And he made 2 movies in 1988 and 1989, and they were Dead Heat. Have you seen Dead Heat, guys?
No.
Oh, yeah. That's fun.
Joe Piscopo. Yeah, I think Joe Bob did it last season on the last drive-in. So he did that. And he did The Punisher, the Dolph Lundgren Punisher.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Neither of which are great movies, but Dead Heat, at least, I think is well worth watching. Now, as far as other stuff that we've talked about here, I mean, he did Showgirls with Verhoeven as well, but he also did The Last Boy Scout for Tony Scott, and he's going to return for the film that we're talking about next week. So the guy's pretty integral to the story of these films, I think. So upon release, Starship Troopers did prove to be one of Verhoeven's most controversial films, and it received mostly negative reviews from critics. Much to Verhoeven's annoyance, a lot of American critics totally failed to see that the film was intended as a satire and accused the director of promoting right-wing fascism. Here's what the Washington Post said in their review from 1997. Verhoeven draws parallels with vintage World War II movies, right down to the reenactment of D-Day landings at Normandy, but he seems more drawn to Nazi chic than Yankee gumption. The high-ranking officers are got up as stormtroopers. The Federation's news bulletins may be computer-friendly, but the video casts themselves are modeled on the propaganda films of Nazi-spitting Leni Riefenstahl. And the schools teach that nothing solves problems as effectively as naked force. Alas, Verhoeven's tone, which varies from camp to cynical, is so inconsistent that it's impossible to decide whether he's sending up the Third Reich or in love with it. And that's just from their review.
Wow.
I sent you guys another link from the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Did you guys read that?
I did.
The one about goose stepping or whatever?
Yeah, the article is titled Goose Stepping into Hollywood, I believe. And it was this guy just totally like going off saying that like essentially this was like a Nazi propaganda movie. And the thing is, first of all, any critic that watches this movie and doesn't see clearly that Verhoeven is satirizing and not glorifying fascism needs a new job. They should not be allowed to review movies anymore. But also accusing Verhoeven of being a Nazi lover. Like, this is a guy who grew up under Nazi occupation. We discussed that back in our Flesh and Blood episode.
Yeah.
He grew up in Nazi occupied Holland, and he literally saw the streets filled with bodies of people who had been killed by the Nazis as a child. I don't know, that it's incredibly frustrating that people, especially critics, it'd be one thing if it was audiences, but critics didn't understand that he was intending this to be a satire. And I don't see how you watch, especially those the propaganda movies that are scattered throughout this. I don't know how you watch those and not know that the tongue is firmly planted in the cheek of Paul Verhoeven.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of comedy breaks in this movie, but the ones that there are pretty obvious.
Satire doesn't like.
It's kind of like they're clearly. Yeah, it's not what this dope from the last one you sent us, the last review you sent us. He clearly missed the point.
I mean, satire. The jokes. The jokes in satire are not the same as like a typical comedy. It's not a setup punchline kind of thing.
Right.
It's the entire absurdity of the situation. But I am wondering if I'm wondering, Gary, what some modern day reviewers thought if any modern reviewers might still think that Verhoeven's a fascist, or maybe they just don't like the movie. I don't, who knows? But were you able to dig anything up on this one, Gary?
Yeah. Oddly, back at the time, you could find reviews like that, but like most modern reviewers seem to at least understand what Verhoeven might have been trying to go for here. I will give them that.
Yeah.
That does not mean that out of all of those modern reviewers, you can't find somebody that just needs a nap. This person gave it 1 star. Title of the review is "This is just stupid. Why did they make this?" And then the rest of the review goes on to say, "And who did they make it for? It just seems like a bad comedy, but it's not billed as a comedy. It's like a parody of itself that falls flat. The only target audience I can think of is junior high school students, stereotypically boys who like blood, guts, and violence and gore, done with realism of professional wrestling and nudity. Although I didn't know movie studios actually targeted nudity to that age group. This movie makes Sharknado look like high class. At least that one is so over the top it's funny. This is just stupid."
That sounds a lot like a couple of the reviews that we found for Total Recall.
Right. You're right.
It really does, where they're like, "Oh, this movie's made for 12-year-olds."
Most of these people are going to be about the book. I will say that. Like, that was a large amount of what I saw. This is a 1 star. It's not the book. This movie's objective is not to fulfill the book story and plot twist. Director just got the hint of the story. Spoiled brat kills monster and becomes hero. They ruined the characters' images, ruined the plot, and some very important lessons and details that made the book a unique story. Is what these folks said. Jeff Everts gave it 1 out of 5 stars. Appalling interpretation. The book of the same name asked the question, is there a way to be a good human being and a good soldier at the same time? The book's answer was, you can't be a good soldier without being a good human first. The movie reverses this completely. From the director, war makes fascists of us all. Well, let me say this. The director is certainly entitled to his opinion, having experienced firsthand the Nazi invasion of his country. I respect that life experience. It's important. Writing a screenplay that opposes the prevailing opinion is a great way to go about spreading your ideas. Kenneth Lee did an excellent job in Red as Blood. Having said all that, using someone else's title and character names to market your film, your new film, is not okay. This is a bad movie which cheapens the characters and misses the moral completely. Skip this and move on. This person says, thank goodness Heinlein died before this movie was made. I recently read the book that this movie was, in quotes, based on, and I'm flabbergasted at how this film was made based on the source material. It turns the ideology of the book on its head, delivering a completely opposite message about the military duty, service, and self-sacrifice for the greater good. It was the equivalent of having a movie adaptation of 1984 that sided with the government as a comedy. This is utter garbage. I couldn't even finish this. This one's titled On the Rotational Velocity of Deceased Authors. This is probably one of the worst movie adaptations of a book in the history of cinema. It bears only the most superficial resemblance to the classic novel by Robert Heinlein. It proves once more that Hollywood has utter contempt for the profession of writing, whether of books or screenplays. Hollywood producers seem to believe that writing is a superfluous element in the making of films, and their disregard for its importance is obvious in movies such as this. We have seen a trend to use special effects as a crutch for weak plots and inadequate acting, but here we can add to this the defamation of the work of a deceased author. As for judging it as a movie on its own merits, it has none. If you have nothing better to do than to watch this movie, you need to try harder.
Wow.
It says it's not worth the time investment, even if you're fast forwarding through it.
A lot of these people this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, honestly, when people are judging a movie solely on whether it's an accurate adaptation of its source material.
Yeah, a lot of these people are upset.
That seems like the majority of this stuff, when really, and I get that if you love the book, you want to see a accurate adaptation. A lot of them seem to be completely missing the point of what Verhoeven's trying to do, but also the book exists on its own. A movie can exist on its own, and some things work in one setting and some things work in the other, like the mech suits we were talking about and how silly they would look jumping up and down across the screen. They made that decision because they thought it would not look right. Whereas in your mind, as you're reading the book, it's not going to be as big of a deal. So to judge a movie based on how accurate it is to the source material. I mean, I get if you're close to the source material, it being frustrating, but judge a movie based on its own merits.
I will say
a lot of these people don't seem to be doing that.
Yeah, they're clearly not, and they're disappointed because they apparently watched it because of the book. And again, I haven't read the book either. So, but I will say I got a couple of quick ones here that are. I think their point is trying to be, and I'm not saying I agree or disagree. I'm just saying that even the point of the book is removed from this. So everything except the title is different. So this one says, Heinlein wrote a masterpiece that tries to show the justification for the use of force and the need for a well-disciplined military. The screen adaptation turns it into beautiful fascists from outer space with tactical noobs. I'm not even going to get into the technical aspects of the movie. I guess I should sum it up by saying it was horrible, awful, and painfully bad. On the lighter side, the special effects are cool. I do wish the bugs had weapons. That's what that person said.
The bugs are weapons.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, they got they got tanker bugs. They got the ground grunt bugs. They've got the nuclear bugs that shoot the stuff out of their butthole.
Yeah.
This person seems to understand it's different, but they call this review is titled "A Perversion of Heinlein's Novel." It says this movie is beyond wretched. It had the potential to be no more than a B-grade sci-fi monster movie with classy special effects, but for some reason, Verhoeven decided that he had to make it into a twisted version of Heinlein's writing. Those who have seen the movie but not read the book may be shocked to learn that what Heinlein actually wrote was a story about a fundamentally noble human culture with the moral justifications for war against an implacable or implacable enemy. There was none of Verhoeven's pseudo-Nazi fascism and grade school quality propaganda in Heinlein's version. Film adaptations of books inevitably leave something of the book behind, but Verhoeven has managed to raise this to a truly dreadful art in Starship Troopers. Virtually nothing of the book remains, except for some of the characters' names, and even most of those have been switched. For example, in the book, Lieutenant Razak was never a school teacher. That man's name was Dubois, and Private Flores was male. Worst of all, though, is Verhoeven's twisted version of Heinlein's philosophy. Verhoeven has literally turned the moral center of the novel completely backwards, then tacked Heinlein's name on it as though it were a legitimate portrayal of what Heinlein was actually saying. Using a man's name to legitimize what is no more than a parody of his work is simply wrong. Bottom line, it's a bad movie made for rotten reasons out of an otherwise great piece of literature.
Well, first of all, they have to put Robert Heinlein's name on it because legally they purchased the rights to the novel, and I'm pretty sure that is a requirement when you do that, unless the author asked not to do that. In which case, Heinlein couldn't do that because he's dead.
Yeah,
but is that all of them?
Well, I was going to say, if I may, I do have one more that is strictly towards the movie, and this is from Letterboxd from Bobastair, who says, "Nope, still don't see why people like this. Give it 1 star. It's not satire because, spoiler alert, because fuck you, the bugs die and the queen gets captured and the fascist good guys win, etc., etc. Despite the cheese and blatant simple-mindedness of the fascist good guys, there's never any indication from the movie that they're wrong. The audience might think it, but as far as we know, the movie doesn't. It's like calling Birth of a Nation a satire. The story is absurd in our contemporary cultural context, but there is no sign from the text here that that's the intended reaction. Just because it plays its absurdity straight-faced doesn't mean it's not stupid. A few reasons why this movie is absurd. The protagonist is living his own fan fiction. He's a couple of notches above Harry Potter and Geralt of Rivia in terms of self-insert. Again, everyone's fascist and it's played straight. Neil Patrick Harris's outfit at the end. Every major character, each a childhood friend of the protagonist, Mary Sue, ends up in a position of comparably ludicrous power in the military by a series of rapid impulses from their CEOs, and are, of course, ultimately reunited and happy-go-lucky, skipping across the desert back to their gunships despite having just witnessed and partaken in terrifying and mortally dangerous situations. Neil Patrick Harris is unironically a psychic. Despite being born and raised in Argentina, Mary Sue and family are whiter than polar bears playing ultimate frisbee in a snowstorm. Nobody gives a shit about Mary Sue's poor decisions or the consequences they bring. And despite the fact that Mary Sue is likable as a particularly wealthy bit of cardboard, he never gets in any serious flack for those consequences. The formations of the soldiers are batshit crazy in the very essence of war, of attrition, despite it being half past the future. We have millennia of military tactics for those who care about those sorts of things, like Civil War buffs. The movie never dissuades you from thinking that war is fun. In short, playing a joke straight-faced the whole way through with no punchline is not a joke at all. This movie is not satire. It is not secretly smart. This movie is a pubescent boy's half-baked fantasy brought to the big screen with presentation that is as dodgy as its content.
Who are they calling a Mary Sue? Johnny Rico?
Yeah, I think they're calling Johnny Rico a Mary Sue.
Well, I think a male version of a Mary Sue would be called a Gary Stew.
A Gary Stew. I hate that. One review, by the way, on Letterboxd was just 1 star that said there is a momentary shot of a dead dog.
Okay.
I think that was my wife who wrote that one.
Okay.
I don't 100% know it's under a different name, but I'm just saying.
I mean, some of these people seem to at least know that Verhoeven was attempting a satire, even if they don't think that he did a good job, which I personally disagree with. But at the time that it came out, a lot of people didn't seem to get the joke back in 1997. The film was seen as juvenile and crass, or it just wasn't seen at all. The film ended up grossing only barely half of its $100 million budget here in the U.S. And I don't think it's necessarily like a huge surprise that some of the folks who saw it back then didn't love it, especially if they didn't get the satire, or maybe if they did, maybe it just pissed them off, because Verhoeven is basically giving a big old middle finger to the USA and specifically America's military industrial complex. A lot of people are not going to take very kindly to that.
Yeah.
I mean, in his version of the future, so humankind has started colonizing other worlds, and they pissed off a species of giant bugs in the process, which is kind of what Gary was getting at with the Star Trek original series comparison. They are just, the bugs are just trying to defend themselves. They're not trying to start a war. We invaded their area, and they're just trying to fight back. But we, as we often tend to do, we viewed their self-defense as acts of aggression and decided to launch a war against these bugs, in a war that we can't possibly win. Because the whole time they're fighting this, this is an unwinnable war. The bugs are undoubtedly a better force than the military in this film.
Yeah. I mean, sheer numbers and just strength.
Yeah. I mean, it does speak, I think, a lot. The film speaks a lot to, I think, Americans' deep-rooted jingoism, and for somehow the very blatant, very unsubtle satire of this film just wasn't recognized for what it was. I don't know if people were just blind to it, or they just went in with a different expectation and didn't see it. I'm not sure, but it's very now. I mean, maybe, and this could be us speaking in hindsight, because there's been, almost a quarter century of discussion around this film since then. But I think you watch it now and it's very blatantly a satire, even more so than RoboCop.
Well, and of multiple different things. And I don't think that it even lands on anything. I mean, there's clearly, like, there is the Nazi aspect of it, but fascism is the point here. And even hearing Neumeier and Verhoeven talk about it, it's more, Nazis are the easy one. They're the bad guys.
And the visualization of the Nazi aspect of fascism it's pretty easy to get across. There's a lot of iconic imagery, like in the uniforms, in the sets,
like, which is a good point towards what you're saying about, like, people not getting it. It's like, well, they're clearly, like, I mean, when you see Doogie Howser walk out in all black,
he's in an SS uniform.
Yeah, he's clearly a fucking Nazi. Yeah. Like, that's just it. They even play, though, with, like, like the Melrose Place, the whole first part of this movie.
The love triangle. Yeah.
Yeah. And supposedly, like, they even had it, it was interesting during the commentary they were talking about with Denise Richards. They had her actually, like, kissing both guys, and they were going to have it like she actually did love both of them. And so it was a struggle for her, but she had to choose what was best for her, which led to her breaking up with Rika. And they said, like, test audiences, like, fucking hated it.
Yeah.
Like, they got angry about it, that she would have to choose, or that she was struggling between the two guys, and they just hated her and hated her. They were like, we were trying to be good feminists and be like, she's the strong one. Like, she's got two possible options here. She loves both, but she's having to choose what's best for her and, like, move on. And they're like, people just fucking hated Denise Richards. They were like, they were done with her. And they especially didn't want any more leading on of Johnny Rico during the movie. And so they cut, like, a lot of the love triangle stuff, I guess, like, just somewhere in there. But anyway, that's a side note, but I just thought that was interesting. But yeah, they play it like Melrose Place at the beginning, and then, but, like, a lot of it is not even, just trying to be, like, straight up all about Nazi. Like, one of the things they bring up and a couple of things I've seen was Verhoeven talking about just like, well, look at them, you know, like they're in this world where we try to establish that there are lots of different areas of this. Like, for instance, Johnny's parents they're like, in this society, they're the labor class, they're the working class, and they just gotten established into this certain position that they're rich, and that's looked upon as great. You don't get to vote, but you don't have to care about anything else that's going on or something like that. So they were even trying to toy with that a little bit, and they were saying that, you know, you're in a perfect society. Like Verhoeven straight up, like literally says in one thing I read, it was like, you are in the perfect, politically correct, accurate society. Like there is no racism, there is no bigotry, there is no nothing. Like it's just everybody gets along and everybody agrees on these certain principles. But what did you have to do to have it happen?
Right.
And,
yeah. What at what cost?
Yeah. And they're like, you got it, but how did you get it? And he says that that's like another thing they were looking at. And,
well, that's the thing. In the world of this film, fascism has won. You know, everything that you see, it looks pretty and shiny on the outside, but it's like, this is a society that's geared around and idealizes the military. Like, we don't see a lot of the world outside the lives of the main characters. So everything we see is kind of through the prism of their experiences, but we do still see the effects of war within the scarred and disfigured bodies of their teachers. And Michael Ironside missing his arm, and the guy when they're signing up, when they're, you know, getting their assignments, who's missing an arm and both legs, and in Rue McClanahan's character, who has clearly been blinded in war. You know,
all the adults are like scarred, injured people.
Yeah, everyone.
Like, and these kids are brought up to think that war is such a part of life. Like we mentioned earlier, a quote from Verhoeven, but like, I mean, that he's saying these people they have no libido because their big concern is like war is exciting. Like war is just a part of things. So that's why even when like people die, it's like, you know, that's what you signed up for. Like, this is the ultimate like place to be. Like, this is what you do.
Yeah. I mean, the movie basically tracks Johnny's rise from like a directionless kid, kind of high schooler, to a mindless war machine. Yeah, because that's all that this society praises. And he's really just doing it, honestly, because he wants to get laid. Like he goes because he's following a woman, and then his rise through the military ranks, as we see throughout the film, is fueled mostly by the deaths of his fellow troopers. Like somebody dies and he gets a promotion. It happens over and over throughout the movie.
Well, he sticks around because his parents die. Like that's something straight up they cover in the commentary too, that they mention is like, so well said. I mean, like Johnny Rico is rich. Like his family is rich. He doesn't have to do this thing. He is doing it because of a girl, which is Verhoeven said that they talked to like multiple military members who talked about signing up because of a member of the opposite sex or something like that. And so like he does this not for any like moral thing that he's trying to accomplish. Like he's actually just doing it for pussy.
Yeah, he doesn't have like any great aspirations. He doesn't have any great feelings about being a citizen. He is horny.
Yeah, and he wants her, and so he signs up. He jumps into the military, and then when she dumps him, I mean, that's pretty much it for him. Like, and then he, you know, like loses a troop. Like, I mean, you know, like the person that died. It's just all this stuff adds up. He's just like, well, I'm getting out of here. Like,
yeah, and he starts to leave, and then they get attacked, and he has to start up again.
Yeah, then Buenos Aires gets blown up, and so that changes everything.
One reason the film was misunderstood is that it's almost too good at doing the things that it's satirizing. I think some of those reviews that you read, Gary, are kind of point to this fact. Like it's almost a little too straight-faced that people didn't understand that it was a satire.
Well, that was one of the things I hated about those reviews, actually. And I was going to mention that is that, you know, they give so much shit to like Neil Patrick Harris walking out looking like a Nazi, and they're like, okay, yeah, we get it, blah, blah, blah. But as a younger guy, when I first saw this movie, that was not something I thought of. Right. Legitimately, I did not get it. And
but you were like 15.
Yeah. I just mean, like, so I don't know that it says, I mean, it is on the nose, but I don't consider this film as on the nose as everybody says. Like, clearly the people at the time did not fucking get it. They didn't understand it, like the critics. And so it gives you all the context clues that it can in the idea of like, well, Buenos Aires gets blown up, but then later on, I mean, it clearly seems like the bugs are the bad guys from their POV, but then later on you find out there was like a Mormon settlement on this planet that these people all got attacked. So that was the, the cause of anybody even realizing this planet was a thing. And then you start to get into the details about like, okay, well, so then the military now knows this is a thing. And what is it about this planet that they like? And, and there's even, I don't know, like you could start to draw your own conclusions about like, was Buenos Aires even really a bug attack, for God's sake? Who knows? Like if you want to get all conspiracy theory about it. So it's like, we started it by settling there and,
Either
where
way.
they weren't wanted. And the Mormons, per usual, started it. I'm just kidding. Don't pull that quote. Don't pull that. No, it's just it's interesting to me because I think in the commentary actually Verhoeven references like the Iran hostage crisis or something like that saying like these people were taken hostage, but they had settled in an area where they weren't wanted in the first place, and nobody thought that he was saying that like people with power write the history, and so they get to say whatever they want to say caused this thing. So the Iranian hostage crisis was as simple as they've taken a bunch of people hostage. He's like, it was no discussion of, well, they settled in a place that they weren't wanted. And then also like the government that was in power was put there by the CIA back at this time. And like, he starts going down this list and you're like, holy shit. Like, it's just it's way more complex, but for all of our purposes, the Iranians were bad people and they just took these took these people hostage. That's the only part of the story you need to know. And so anyway, it's just it's interesting to see that like it's clearly about the people in power get to decide how it sounds and how the world works, and they usually decide that with violence. And so
I mean that's Michael Ironside's character in those early scenes in the school where he all but says like totalitarianism is the way to go, not democracy.
Yeah, they straight up. I mean, so yeah, even there, like he says straight up says in that classroom, like when it was discovered that democracy doesn't work. Yeah, like this is what we found out. And I think that's Verhoeven's like point is just like, yeah, I mean, once you get enough power, whoever it is, once they get enough power that generally they're like, we don't have to do democracy anymore because it takes too long, and we'll use that power by violence if necessary to just make what we want to fucking have happen.
One thing that what I think of Verhoeven's sharpest tools in getting the satire across in this movie are those newsreels that he used to great effect in RoboCop, but I would argue he uses them to an even greater effect here. Like the recruitment videos and the commercials scattered throughout, like especially the ones that bookend the film, the one at the very beginning, the one at the very end. I think that really shows you Verhoeven's intent. That's why I said earlier, like I can't imagine anyone seeing these and not knowing that this is a satire. Because even at the one at the end, basically it's sort of a victory show, but also like we're gonna keep fighting. There's no end to this war. The violence is not going to end now that we've quote unquote won, because there is no winning it, but I think he uses these incredibly well. There's also the one where you've got the kids stomping on the bugs, it's like a commercial. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of showing it's almost a form of like brainwashing the kids into thinking, hey, these bugs are inhuman, which I mean, you know what I mean, inhuman. But right. But that's how we see them, as nothing more than something to be squashed.
Well, it's like clearly they're not like sentient beings with like a conscience or a thought process, anything more than just insects. Like they're just monsters that murder things, which they play to great effect a couple of times, strictly, by the way, with eyes, which we talked about back in, oh God, what was the Toby Hooper movie? With the guy, remember when the cast, the full body cast was on the guy, and the eyes looked like.
Are you talking about Dead and Buried?
Yeah,
it wasn't Toby Hooper, but yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right. That was the Dan O'Bannon.
It was the Dan O'Bannon, yeah.
So when the eyes were like so effective, I've never realized like how much. Maybe that's why I have such a hatred for eyeball violence, because it's like they're almost the windows to the soul.
Whoa! Did you just make that up? What? Holy! Wait a minute.
Write that down. That's a quote from Gary Horne.
Eyes are the window.
Yeah. Because in that's like a full like fucking puppet, and the eyeballs like seem legit, like they seem like there's emotion in them, and they do that.
What are you talking about? The bug? Oh, you're talking about in Dead and Buried.
Well, in Dead and Buried, yes. And then I was going to say they do it again. Not they do it again, but like it's the same kind of thing in this. When like remember there's the point where the one bug's on the ground and you see like it looking at the soldier, its eye, and then it like takes its POV as the soldier just like blows its face off or whatever, and it's like you almost kind of feel bad. You're like there's something there besides just
it's not just a predator.
Like it's like just a mindless beast, and especially with the brain bug at the end.
Oh yeah, they get it, where like it goes from being puppy dog eyes.
Yeah, where it goes from like being a super creepy, gross monster to like by the end where NPH is like saying it's scared. It looks scared. It looks frightened, and you know, like it's kind of sad. Like I remember watching it even the first time, being like, I kind of feel bad for this,
which is exactly what you're supposed to feel.
Yeah,
you're supposed to feel bad for it. And I find it interesting also the parallels between the humans and the bugs in the military ranks, because you've got these grunts on the ground that are just sort of expendable, which is what Johnny Rico and what they start out off as, you know, the troopers on the ground, just like the bugs. Mm-hmm. You know, they're the ones that kind of the front line that just are sort of expected to get slaughtered. And then at the top of the ranks, you've got the brain bug and you've got the psychics, the military intelligence, as they call them, like Neil Patrick Harris. Very similar hierarchy between the humans and the bugs. It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this too. Watch Neil Patrick Harris throughout this movie. He's a fucking psychopath, like from the start. Like he really is. Like he is not normal. Like he doesn't seem like he's buddies. He is clearly one of these Nazi scientists that like just, you know, like the exact kind of person you would see like running Hydra or something.
It's
like
fucking Joseph Mengele.
Yeah, he's like sitting there, like, I mean, even when like Carmen and Rico first meet, like he tries to kiss Carmen, and then later he's like, as soon as at the prom, like Rico leaves Dizzy, like he swoops in, so he's just like, I will take whatever I can get, you know, like he's just like, and then he's sitting there running experiments on Rico. You know, they're supposed to be best friends, but there's nothing like super friendly. He's like, clearly Rico looks at him as a friend, but like for Neil Patrick Harris, he's just kind of like, let me see how these powers work. Do I have it? And then he like sees if he can control this bear. I don't know. If you watch it again, like Neil Patrick Harris is never like human in his emotions at all. Like he is clearly just a weirdo obsessed with control.
I think Verhoeven is also once again proving himself to be kind of spookily prescient with his satire. You know, in this film, he's kind of using the film to critique everything from the fascism of the Nazis to, I think, Vietnam and even the then recent Gulf War. I've actually got a quote here from Verhoeven about this.
When the Kuwait War started, there was an enormous amount of propaganda in the American media to prepare the American nation for this war. To get the American people behind the government and the war, the USA vilified continuously the other side. The same thing happened when Iraq nearly started the war again. You could read in the newspapers every day, again, more vilification of Saddam Hussein. True or untrue.
And you do see that type of vilification in the film. like that commercial that I mentioned, the commercial where the kids are stomping on the roaches, and in a lot of the other propaganda films where it talks about bugs. I mean, the government is training kids to believe that all bugs are bad, or as they actually say in the film, the only good bug is a dead bug, which is a phrase that in itself brings to mind anti-Japanese sentiment during World War II, or if you want to go even further back, the slaughtering of the Native Americans. Like that is a phrase. The only good, excuse the term, but the only good Jap is a dead Jap is something that was a phrase that was used as propaganda against the Japanese during World War II, or the only good Indian is a dead Indian.
There was a quote from Verhoeven I wrote down, like from well, he said it, and I didn't have time to look completely into it, but it was called, like, he said there was like a theory called like Schmidt theory or something like that. Oh, I can't remember if that was exactly right, but it was that for a nation to define itself, it needs to define its enemy. And I thought that was really well said.
He's such a smart dude.
Yeah.
And these themes still sadly resonate today. Just a few years after this film's release, history would once again repeat itself with the U.S.'s invasion of Afghanistan, which is something that this very week we're seeing the horrible after effects of.
Yeah. I literally thought of that as I was watching this movie. I was like, fuck, man, we're going to celebrate the 20th anniversary of 9/11 talking about Afghanistan again. Not for like great reasons.
Yeah. And here's another angle that I thought of while watching this movie, though. The entire movie is also sort of staged as a propaganda film itself. Like as if this movie is sort of a dramatization of an actual soldier named Johnny Rico and about his rise, but it's starring some like a pampered actor who looks like Casper Van Dien. You know, like
100%.
that could very well be what Verhoeven's trying to do, because that has been done. I mean, I wish I could remember the name, or I had written down the name of the movie, but there was a movie that came out that starred a soldier from, I want to say World War II, and it was a dramatization, but he actually played himself in the movie, which is something that Quentin Tarantino played on in
I was just about to say,
Inglourious Basterds. Yeah,
sounds familiar.
He 100%. You can find him talking about this. That was the idea. You're watching. You are a part of this society watching a propaganda film.
Yeah. And
it's not just like Nazi propaganda or Third Reich stuff. He's like, this is also based a lot on American propaganda films.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's stuff they show like when they first land on the alien planet, this like storming the beaches of Normandy.
Dude, watch some of the propaganda videos from World War II. You know, like that was produced by Americans, not by the Nazis, but by the Americans. I mean, this is
Johnny Rico goes through this.
We're playing from the same playbook.
Yeah.
You know?
And he says, like, I mean, it's like literally like the thing Denise Richards sends him to break up with him is called a Dear Johnny letter. Like, it's, you know, widely known for like soldiers who like join up for women and then they get their Dear John letter or whatever that like breaks up with them and they move on. And that's part of the soldier's life. He's like, it's all like pulling from the military playbook, like just all the common themes and that sort of thing of a propaganda film. And you're supposed to be watching it to the point that literally in the commentary, Neumeier and Verhoeven are literally talking about how Verhoeven saying, you know, one of the fun things is he's like, I show these commercials and they're like telling you like, would you like to know more? Would you, you know, should we attack them? Should we do all these things? I'm asking the audience. And Neumeier's like, generally the audience would like to see more. They would like to know more. Yeah. Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, this is true. And Neumeier's like, so I think what we're saying is like potentially like all of us have fascism inside of us in our blood. And like Verhoeven's like, I will let you argue that point. I will not touch that point.
Not touching that one. But I mean, I think the idea that you're watching a propaganda movie is proven more by the fact that it is bookended with those videos, those kind of recruitment videos at the beginning and end of the movie. You know, what better way than to show this rollicking story of a hero's rise, and then at the end you've got that very hero asking you to join the fight. You know, it's I think it's really outstanding. I think this is possibly Verhoeven's smartest movie. And like we've said time and again, Verhoeven is like a certifiable genius. Like he legitimately is an incredibly intelligent person. And this, I think, is his most biting satire and his smartest movie yet. Now, Starship Troopers wasn't as big of a disappointment at the box office as Showgirls, but it only grossed about $55 million domestic. But just as Showgirls did, Starship Troopers gained a major cult following on video and is often spoken about in the same terms as ROBOCOP when Verhoeven's career is discussed these days, many years later. And all in all, it did decent overseas and through like re-release and doing well on video. It's made something like $121 million worldwide. So it's turned out to do very well. And of course, it has, I guess surprisingly, but maybe not considering it did gain a cult following, but it has been followed by several sequels. The first one is called Starship Troopers 2, Hero of the Federation, which was written by Ed Neumeier and directed by Phil Tippett himself. The film premiered on the Encore Action Channel in 2004 before being released on video. I happened to watch this film this weekend. It's not good. It is actually very bad. It's got potential, but the story is very interesting. It's set the soldiers are kind of trapped in this facility, and the bugs have been able to sort of control people by they've got like these bugs that'll crawl into you and take over your brain and, and control people. It's got potential, but I mean, it's a very, very low budget and it feels like a made for TV movie, honestly. And that was followed by another sequel in 2008. Starship Troopers 3 Marauder was both written and directed by Ed Neumeier. And unlike Part 2, which had an entirely different cast, Part 3 saw the return of at least one cast member from the original film, which was Casper Van Dien as Johnny Rico. He has also joined his co-star, and I would say the star of the film, because she's in it more than Johnny Rico, but Jolene Blalock from Star Trek Enterprise is in Starship Troopers 3. And it's also not great. It's better than Part 2. It's better than Part 2, but it's also not great. But I mean, it's another one that had potential. It just has a pretty low budget, and it's also feels about half an hour too long, honestly. I was halfway through the movie and I thought it was almost over, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, there's another hour of this. All right.
So essentially Verhoeven is like the master of starting franchises that the sequels
turn out terrible.
The sequels can't touch.
Yeah. I mean, nobody's got his touch. Even Ed Neumeier, who is I think a good writer, he doesn't have Verhoeven's touch. Like the thing with Starship Troopers and ROBOCOP is that they've got that combination of Neumeier's script and Verhoeven's sort of like just a special thing that he brings to it that other directors simply can't pull off. Because there are some satirical elements to both of those films, 2 and 3. Especially Part 3, which is actually the propaganda movies in Part 3, because those continue throughout. They're in Part 2 a little bit, only kind of at the beginning and end, but they're kind of scattered throughout Part 3. And those are the best parts of the movie because they're actually very funny and very well done, but the rest of the movie kind of suffers. That film, though, Part 3 was followed by 2 computer animated films set in the Starship Troopers universe. The first, which was released in 2012, is called Starship Troopers Invasion. It's a Japanese-American co-production. It was directed by anime director Shinji Aramaki and written by Flint Dill, who is best known for his work in the 80s on TV shows like G.I. Joe and Transformers. He wrote the Transformers movie, but then Shinji, and that one is all new cast. It is the same characters. It's got like Carmen and Johnny and people from the original film, but different voice actors roles. But then Shinji Aramaki returned to direct the next installment, which is 2017 Starship Troopers Traders of Mars. He directed it alongside Masaru Matsumoto, with Ed Neumeier returning to write it. And this most recent sequel sees actually the return of Casper Van Dien as Johnny Rico and Dina Meyer as Dizzy Flores. And I didn't have time to watch these this week.
I watched a little bit of the last one and fell asleep.
I'm very curious
if that's an indicator of how good it is.
I'm curious as to how Dizzy Flores shows back up. considering she was very, very dead.
Yeah.
Don't spoil it for me, Todd, because I'm probably going to watch it in the next couple of days.
Okay.
I love this. Justin's invested.
I'm all in. I'm all in on the saga of Johnny Rico. but I think both of those are on Netflix, aren't they?
They are.
Yeah, I think the animated ones. Yeah. So, I'll watch it. And there was also a TV show called Starship Troopers Roughnecks.
Yeah, I watched the TV show in high school.
It only lasted about a season.
And
there's
really
been talk
just
about
focused on like, hey, we got this mission to go shoot some bugs, and that was it.
And there's been talk of a reboot and everything, of course, as there always is these days. But this original movie, again, like we said with Total Recall and RoboCop, like they remade both of those, but the remakes just don't capture that satire. From
he's Verhoeven. It's sad that he's still kicking and
still making movies.
Yeah, but not as on a large a scale. But I mean, we're gonna round him off next week, I guess. But you kind of touched on it, but just how prescient he is, even with this movie. I mean, think about crazy, it being 1997, and the way that they're like the way that shit's popping up, like the news things. That's like YouTube or like social media or whatever. Like not to sorry to interrupt you, but you've speaking to that point, you've got that scene where you've got the two talking heads fighting about the bugs. Yeah, that was where I was going next. Is like you also have like the fucking newsroom show that's
and
like
Fox News had debuted 13 months before this movie came out.
They did it. They say in the commentary, even the one where the reporter is in the locker rooms or whatever, like on the base, and like he's interviewing Ed Neumeier and Jake Busey, and then like Johnny Rico like sees him talking and runs over, and he's like, "I'm from Buenos Aires, and I say kill them all." That whole scene. He was like, that was straight up based on. He was like during the Iraq War, like a CNN thing we had seen.
Yeah.
And he was like, that was straight up where we stole that from. He was like, it was almost like directly ripped from a thing we had seen on CNN.
That's crazy.
Wow.
So I guess this is about time that we need to discuss further viewing. If you guys were going to do a double feature with Starship Troopers and another film, what would you do?
If I could throw out a couple from left field that I think would fit perfectly with Starship Troopers, it would be. There's a film from God, I don't know. It was back in like 1987, almost 10 years prior. But RoboCop, if you guys haven't seen that, it would probably go really well with this. Or if you want to go just a little bit earlier, go with like there's one with Arnold called Total Recall. That would also, I think either one of those would be like perfect double feature movies.
I think you're absolutely right.
You're on the right track there, Gary.
Honestly, think RoboCop, Starship Troopers is great, and a trilogy
I think it's perfect, honestly,
of sci-fi movies. That would be the ideal way to go. Is Paul Verhoeven's sci-fi trilogy.
If I was going to go 10 years earlier, and I did write this one down and still stick with Arnold. So if I had to combine those two things, I'd say The Running Man is kind of cool.
Yeah, that would be a good one. That's a good satire.
Yeah.
It's more of a satire of like the way we consume entertainment almost, but it is set in sort of a totalitarian
a vibe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it works.
Running Man holds up, man. I watched it about a year ago for the first time in at least a decade, and it held up, I thought, pretty well.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I like Apt Pupil. I feel like this
directed by a child molester.
Yeah, I feel like this movie. Yeah. But I feel like Starship Troopers would have been that kid's favorite movie. And
man, I like that we just went with two Stephen King adaptations in a row.
Yeah,
Running Man and Apt Pupil.
Clearly, King's a Nazi.
If we've learned nothing else.
Have you seen it? That's Nazi propaganda at its finest. Equilibrium. I feel like that's an obvious one you'd throw in there. Like to me, I was like, that just. Or the other one is District 9. Like I thought District 9 worked really well with this.
Yeah,
too.
that would. District 9 is a good one. I think that would work really well.
Yeah,
I'm going a little older than you guys. I'm going Dr. Strangelove.
Okay, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Dr. Strangelove as a satire, like, I mean, I think Dr. Strangelove is one of the best ever made, I think.
And military satire, yes, specifically. Like it's 100%. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I swear to God, I remember Verhoeven saying something in the commentary, like referencing Kubrick a couple of times. So,
I can imagine that had to be on his mind. And if you want to go with the non-satire route, just one that I think would be fun to put up against this one, just in terms of tone, almost, although this one leans a little goofier. Mars Attacks.
Yeah.
It could work. I love Mars Attacks, and it's another alien invasion movie. I mean, not that this one's really an invasion. We are the invaders in Starship Troopers, technically.
Live, Die, Repeat, or whatever.
Edge of Tomorrow.
Edge of Tomorrow.
The actual name of the movie.
Yeah, the actual name. But they put out that one DVD with like Live, Die, Repeat.
Oh, I know. It's annoying.
And you're like, that's actually the better title, though.
It is. Well, the original title of that was
All You Need Is Kill.
All You Need Is Kill.
Yeah.
That's what they should have called the movie. That's a great name.
That's a great title.
That's the name of the novel that it's based on.
One thing I did want to get in there is that I thought was very interesting. That was just a side random note. But, you know, the composer here is back to RoboCop. It's
Basil.
It's old Basil. God, what's his last name? It's
Polidaros or something.
Polidaros. Polidoros or something like that. Sorry if I'm fucking it up. But anyway, that is his daughter on stage at the prom. And like her first movie credit, and she's like she works on like a lot of musical stuff now, but she's singing a song there, an original in the first song, but then its second song that she sings is it's called Have Not Been to Paradise. It's the song that she's singing, but it's actually a David Bowie song called Have Not Been to Oxford Town, and David Bowie like gave them the song and let them rewrite the lyrics to it. So the lyrics reference like the 23rd century and like all of this stuff, but it's like they took the David Bowie song and she sings it, but like with new Starship Troopers lyrics.
Interesting. If we're talking about some familial connections, there is, so Paul Verhoeven's daughter was actually working as a compositor for Phil Tippett's studio on this film. Yeah, so some of that digital compositing that's done in this, her name's Martine Verhoeven, I believe. She worked as a digital compositor on this. And while we're talking about cameos in the film, Ed Neumeier's in it. Ed Neumeier plays the guy who you see in one of the propaganda videos. He's the guy who gets like a trial and then they're like execution tonight, you know, and it shows him like it shows him up close, like the camera's right in his face and he kind of bows his head. He's the guy who gets like accused, tried, and executed all in one day. You know? So that's him. And then also John Davison, who was the producer on the film, the guy who was responsible for getting the rights to the novel for Ed Neumeier. John Davison is also in the film. He's one of the survivors of the Buenos Aires attack that's on the news. So he's in there too. Yeah. So there's a couple of fun cameos in there, a couple of fun additions. Of course, John Davison, he goes back with Verhoeven all the way back, I think, to RoboCop, because he was another one of those another one of those Roger Corman guys who came up with them. So I don't know, that stuff's kind of fun to me, you know, but Ed Neumeier is very like easy to spot.
Stephen Ford is plays Lieutenant Willie in the movie. And Stephen Ford is his name. He's the son of Gerald Ford, the president of the United States.
Wow.
What?
Yeah, he plays Lieutenant Willie. I think he's the first one to die. Like he was like one of the boot camp guys, I think, or like early commanders, like on the ship when they're first going over. And then he's one of the first to die, like when the bugs show up, like when they're on the bug planet and stuff.
So after a couple of disappointing and of course expensive failures, Verhoeven found himself at risk of being an unbankable director. You know, he'd had a really obviously terrible reception to Showgirls, and then this one wasn't a whole lot better. So he decided he might need to tone down the sex and violence in his next film in kind of an attempt to make a more conventional commercial blockbuster. And the resulting film would prove to be the last American production of Verhoeven's career, at least so far. And it also will serve as the conclusion of our series on Paul Verhoeven. That film, of course, you guys are probably aware, starring Kevin Bacon, is Hollow Man. So that's what we're discussing next week. I have not seen it.
Bacon.
20 years probably.
Yeah.
So I remember it not being great, but we'll see. We'll see if our
What is Paul Verhoeven's bacon number? It's one.
It's one. So that's next week. If you want to join us, of course, you can always find these. Most of these films are available to stream online. Head to cinemashock.net where we've got links to where you can find Hollow Man to stream. You can also find all of our episodes there on cinemashock.net, along with links to our Discord, our merch store where you can buy t-shirts and stuff, all kinds of stuff there on cinemashock.net. You can also follow us at cinema_shock on Twitter and Instagram. We're also on Facebook. And I think that's all the places where we are. We're not on TikTok or anything.
I'm excited to talk about Hollow Man because we're going to talk about Elizabeth Shue, who I had a childhood crush on. She's in the original Karate Kid.
Yeah, she is.
She shows back up in Cobra Kai, which if you guys didn't watch Cobra Kai,
I haven't watched it yet. She's also in The Boys.
That's true. I do like Elizabeth. Yeah. She's in a weird position there, but I would. Never mind. I'm not gonna. Never mind. I'm not going to go down that path and try to make whatever kind of comments I can make there. But I will say that congratulations for being fine, Elizabeth Shue.
I'm sure she really appreciates that.
But Cobra Kai is good, by the way. Watch Cobra Kai if you've never watched Cobra Kai. It is fantastic.
I'll watch it one of these days. You guys want to tell everyone where you can be found on the internet?
I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all the socials. And if you like Star Trek, come check out the Computer Resume podcast, where we cover the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order. And that is available wherever you find podcasts. And you can follow that at Computer Resume on all the socials.
How about yourself, Gary?
I am at This Is Gary Horne on all the socials. I also have a wrestling show called This Is Pro Wrestling. It's at TIPW Show. It was formerly called This Is the NWA, but now the NWA owns that, and that is on at NWA. So that's easy to find if you want to check out at NWA on YouTube and everything. We do a post show every Tuesday night. You can check that out. And we're doing 2 pay-per-views coming up by the time you hear this, that same weekend, this weekend, as I'm saying this. Or as you hear this, is
I just want to say
Power. Yeah, sorry, August 28th and August 29th. That makes so much more sense. In St. Louis, Missouri, Empower, the first ever NWA all women's pay-per-view, is taking place, and on Sunday, August 29th, is NWA 73, the 73rd anniversary of the oldest brand of professional wrestling. So you guys should check that out if you want to get into some wrestling.
And Gary will be there, reporting from the ground.
After having been body slammed by a large man.
Maybe Ric Flair.
Ric Flair will be there.
Who is going to be there? Yeah. So, well, I'm Justin _Bishop. I am not hanging out with Ric Flair next weekend, but you can find me on Twitter and Instagram or Letterboxd, where you can follow my continued adventures through the Starship Trooper sequels, if you so desire. Until next week.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
This is for all you new people. I have one rule. Johnny has the keys.
Johnny Rico?
Mm-hmm.
Those South American people are.
They're very white, but maybe
white,
Verhoeven was trying to say something with that.
As as white as Jake Busey's teeth.
Almost.
The brother of Gary and also the son.
It's a fucked up family.